My name is Kate Graves. I'm 18. And my life has never been what you'd call simple. But recently, things got complicated. Really complicated. Before we begin, I want to warn you that this story contains mature themes. It deals with the challenges of new motherhood, family relationships, and infidelity. If these topics make you uncomfortable, you might want to stop watching now. My mom, Irene, she's everything to me. She raised me on her own, and for as long as I can remember, it's always just been the two of us. We didn't have much growing up, but somehow, we made it work. She's strong like that. The kind of person who refuses to let life break her, no matter what gets thrown at her. Even after my dad walked out on us when I was 5. Even after years of working 2 jobs, just to keep us afloat. She was the glue that held us together. But about a year ago, it felt like that glue started to crack. When my mom met Winston, it was like she found this missing piece of herself. She always used to say she didn't need a man to be happy, and for years, I believed her. But then Winston came into our lives. He was different. Charming. Confident. The kind of guy who walks into a room and just owns it, you know? He made her laugh like I hadn't seen in years. And, as much as I hate to admit it, I liked him too, at least at first. But here's the thing about Winston, he's the kind of man you notice. You can't help it. He's attractive, not just to my mom, but to everyone. He's tall, fit, and has this smile that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. And the worst part? He knows it. He's so comfortable with himself, maybe too comfortable. The guy would walk around the house in boxers or shirtless half the time, like it was no big deal. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. He was just being himself, and it was his house too, right? But after a while, it started to feel weird. I'd catch myself noticing things about him. Like how his tattoos moved when he stretched, or the way he'd laugh at his own stupid jokes. And that wasn't okay. I shouldn't have been noticing those things. I didn't know what to do with those feelings, so I buried them. I tried to pretend they didn't exist. Told myself it didn't matter. It was just a stupid crush, or whatever. But then, Florida happened. And everything changed. The trip was supposed to be a fresh start for all of us. My mom's idea, of course. She thought it'd be a good way to bring us closer together, to make things feel more like a family. And honestly, I wanted that too. I wanted to feel normal again. But looking back now, I think that trip did the opposite. It was the beginning of the end. She booked this Airbnb right by the beach. It was cute, one of those houses with a pool and palm trees everywhere. It was perfect. Too perfect. I should have known something was going to happen. I should have known nothing was going to stay the same. That trip, it's the reason I'm telling this story. It's the reason everything fell apart. If you're still with me, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this. Trust me, there's so much more to uncover. When we got to Florida, it was everything my mom had hyped up. The sun, the palm trees, the warm breeze, it felt perfect, almost unreal. We were staying in this cute little house with a pool, and for a minute, I actually let myself believe that maybe this trip would work. Maybe it would bring us closer as a family. I mean, that's all my mom really wanted, for me to get along with Winston. To see him as some kind of father figure or something. But that's not what happened. Not even close. It all started with the room situation. The house had 2 bedrooms, one for my mom and Winston, obviously, and the other one was supposed to be mine. But at the last minute, my mom decided to invite Aunt Clara to join us for part of the trip. And just like that, I lost my room. Winston told me we'd have to share. Not just a room, a bed. He said it like it was no big deal, like it didn't even cross his mind that it might be awkward. He even laughed about it, saying, "We're family now, right? It'll be fine." Fine. That's what I told myself too. I didn't want to make it weird. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it or give my mom any reason to think I wasn't okay with her decision to bring Clara. So, I just nodded and went along with it, even though everything inside me was screaming that this was a bad idea. I mean, how was I supposed to feel okay about sharing a bed with my stepdad? But Winston didn't seem to care. He just tossed his bag on the bed like it was the most normal thing in the world and went about his day. Meanwhile, I was in my head, overthinking every little thing. Do I sleep in my jeans? Do I change in the bathroom? How do I even handle this without looking like a complete idiot? That first night was awkward. There's no other way to describe it. I waited until Winston was already in the room before I grabbed my stuff and went to the bathroom to change. I stayed in there as long as I could, trying to work up the courage to walk back out. I don't know why I felt so self-conscious. It wasn't like he cared what I wore to bed. But I cared. I felt exposed even in something as simple as my pajamas. And when I finally came out, he was just lying there, shirtless, leaning back against the pillows like it was nothing. Like it was totally normal. And for him, maybe it was. But for me? I couldn't even look at him. I climbed into bed as far to the edge as I could get, pulled the blanket up to my neck like it was some kind of shield, and just stared at the ceiling. I couldn't stop thinking about how close we were. About how I could feel the bed shift every time he moved, or how I could hear the sound of his breathing, slow, steady, like he didn't have a care in the world. Meanwhile, I couldn't even relax enough to close my eyes. I don't even know how long I lay there. Hours, probably. Just staring into the darkness, trying to make sense of all the things I was feeling. I mean, I knew it was normal to feel weird about sharing a bed with my stepdad. Who wouldn't? But this wasn't just weird. It was something else. Something I couldn't explain. I hated myself for noticing him the way I did. For noticing how his tattoos moved when he stretched, or how his laugh sounded when he thought something was funny. Those weren't thoughts I was supposed to have. But they were there. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop them. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. My mom? She'd be horrified. My friends? They wouldn't understand. And honestly, I didn't even understand. All I knew was that I felt trapped, in that bed, in that house, in my own head. No matter how much I tried to push it all away, it just kept coming back. The warmth of him lying next to me. The sound of his breathing. The fact that we were so close, I could feel the bed shift every time he moved. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I started to drift off, he would sigh in his sleep, or move just enough to jolt me awake again. It was this endless cycle of confusion and guilt and something else. By the time the sun came up, I was exhausted. Physically, mentally, emotionally. And the worst part? That was only the first night. The trip was just getting started, and I already felt like I was drowning. The second night. God, the second night was where everything changed. I thought maybe it would be easier, you know? I was so tired after barely sleeping the night before. I figured I'd just pass out and not have to think about anything. I thought I'd be too drained to feel awkward or overthink. But instead, I woke up in the middle of the night, and everything was different. I don't even know how it happened. One minute, I was asleep, and the next, I realized I wasn't where I'd been when I closed my eyes. I was closer to him, so close. My arm was touching his, and I could feel his warmth. It wasn't intentional. At least, I don't think it was. But the moment I realized it, my heart just stopped. I froze. I didn't even breathe for what felt like forever. I told myself to move back, to get as far away as possible. But for some reason, I didn't. I just stayed there, and I couldn't figure out why. At first, I thought maybe he hadn't noticed. He was so still, and his breathing was steady, like he was still asleep. But then he moved. Just a little at first, like maybe he was shifting in his sleep. But then he turned over, toward me. I thought my heart was going to explode. I closed my eyes, thinking maybe if I just pretended to still be asleep, it would all go away. But when I opened them, he was looking at me. He was awake. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't even move. I just lay there, staring at him, completely frozen. And then he said, "It's okay. Don't worry about it." Like it was nothing. Like I wasn't lying there, absolutely losing my mind. I didn't know how to take that. Was he trying to make me feel better? Was he saying it because he thought I was scared? Or was there something else he wasn't saying? His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it that I couldn't figure out. Something that made me feel confused. And then he reached out and touched my shoulder. Just for a second. But it wasn't just a pat. It was different. It lingered just long enough to make me wonder what he meant by it. Long enough to make my chest tighten. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell him it was an accident, that I didn't mean to end up so close to him. But I didn't. I just stayed there, completely still, while my brain spiraled out of control. And then he moved his hand again. It wasn't a lot. Just enough to feel like it wasn't innocent. Just enough to make it clear that it wasn't nothing. And I didn't stop him. I don't know why. I can't explain it. I just know that I didn't pull away, even though I knew I should have. Even though everything inside me was screaming that this was wrong, that I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But I couldn't make myself move. I couldn't even think straight. All I could feel was this strange mix of fear and something else. Something I didn't want to admit was there. I felt guilty and excited at the same time. Like I was teetering on the edge of something I didn't understand. And it terrified me. It didn't last long. A second, maybe two. And then he stopped. He rolled onto his back and closed his eyes like nothing had happened. Like it was just another normal night. But for me, it was anything but normal. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what had just happened. What it meant. What I was supposed to do now. I couldn't sleep after that. I just kept replaying it in my head, over and over, trying to make sense of it. Trying to figure out if I'd done something wrong. If I'd somehow let it happen. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find the answer. All I knew was that everything was different now. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. The next morning was different. The air felt heavy, like we were both trying to act like nothing had happened. I woke up before Winston did, and for a while, I just stayed there, staring at the wall, trying to figure out how I was supposed to get through the day. My chest felt tight, and my stomach was in knots. I couldn't stop replaying everything from the night before, but at the same time, I didn't even want to think about it. I wanted it to just go away. When Winston finally woke up, he acted completely normal. He stretched, yawned, and gave me this casual smile like we hadn't crossed a line. Like it was just another day. But the way he looked at me, it wasn't the same. I could feel it. There was this tension. He didn't say anything about the night before, but the way his eyes lingered on me for just a little too long, the way his tone was softer than usual, it was like he was testing me. Waiting to see if I'd say something. I didn't. I couldn't. I just kept quiet, pretending like everything was fine, even though my head was screaming at me to figure out what the hell had just happened. I tried to focus on anything else, what we'd have for breakfast, what the weather was like, anything. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. And then there was my mom. She was so oblivious. She didn't notice a thing. She kept going on about how excited she was for our plans that day, how happy she was that we were all here together. And every time she smiled at me or laughed at one of Winston's jokes, it made me feel sick. She had no idea. No idea what had happened while she was asleep in the next room. And I hated myself for not telling her. For keeping this secret from her. Winston, though, he was different around her. I noticed it almost immediately. He was trying harder. Complimenting her more, helping her with little things, going out of his way to be the perfect husband. But at the same time, he was careful. Like he was afraid she'd pick up on something if he let his guard down. I don't think she noticed, though. She was too happy to see it. She was so sure this trip was bringing us all closer together. And I just went along with it because, what else could I do? I couldn't ruin this for her. I couldn't tell her the truth. The rest of the trip felt like a blur. I kept my distance from Winston as much as I could, but it was impossible to avoid him completely. He'd catch my eye at random moments, and every time, my heart would start racing. I couldn't tell if I was scared of him or scared of myself, of how I felt. I didn't understand it, and I hated that. I hated feeling so out of control. When we finally got home, I thought it would get easier. I thought I'd be able to push it all out of my head, pretend like it never happened. But it wasn't that simple. Every time I looked at Winston, I felt it all over again. The guilt, the confusion, the shame. And every time he looked at me, it was like he knew exactly what I was feeling. Like he was holding it over me somehow. He didn't say anything outright, but there were these little comments, these looks he'd give me when no one else was around. Like he was reminding me to keep quiet. I wanted to tell someone, I wanted to tell my mom, or even just a friend, but every time I got close to saying something, I'd hear his voice in my head, "It's okay. Don't worry about it." Like it was some kind of warning. So, I didn't tell anyone. I just shut down. I started avoiding him as much as I could. I stayed in my room more, skipped family dinners, made excuses to leave the house whenever he was around. But even that wasn't enough. He was still there, always there, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get away from him. Not really. And then there were the flashbacks. God, the flashbacks. It felt like my mind was stuck on a loop, replaying everything over and over again. The way the bed had shifted that night. The way his voice sounded when he told me it was okay. The way his hand lingered just a little too long. I'd lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, and it was like I was back there all over again. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape him. And the worst part? I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know if I hated him or myself more. I didn't know if I was the victim or the one to blame. All I knew was that I felt trapped. Trapped in this house, trapped in my own head, trapped in this secret that I couldn't tell anyone. And I didn't know how to make it stop. It didn't take long for things to start falling apart. At first, I thought maybe it was just me, maybe I was imagining it because of everything I was feeling. But I wasn't. I could see it, clear as day. My mom and Winston weren't the same anymore. Something had shifted between them, and even though she didn't know what it was, she felt it too. She started asking him these little questions, like, "Are you okay? Is something bothering you?" At first, he brushed her off. He'd laugh or kiss her on the forehead and tell her everything was fine. But I could see it in his face, he wasn't fine. He was nervous. Distant. And the more she pushed, the more I felt like I was suffocating. Because I knew. I knew I was the reason why. It wasn't just the way he acted with her, either. It was the way he acted with me. Some days, he was overly nice, asking me how I was doing, offering to help me with random things, even suggesting we spend time together, just the two of us. And then there were other days, days when he wouldn't even look at me. Like he couldn't stand to be in the same room. It was this constant back and forth, and it made me feel like I was losing my mind. Like I didn't know where I stood with him anymore, or how I was supposed to act. And then there was my mom. God, my mom. Every time I saw her trying so hard to connect with him, I felt like the worst person in the world. She loved him so much, and she didn't deserve any of this. She didn't deserve the lies, the tension, the cracks that were starting to form between them. And every time she hugged me, or told me how much she loved me, it just made the guilt worse. Because I was keeping this huge secret from her, and it was destroying her marriage. I kept telling myself it wasn't my fault. That I hadn't done anything wrong. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I couldn't. Because if I hadn't been there, if I hadn't let things happen the way they did, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe they'd still be happy. Maybe everything would still be normal. It all came to a head one night when I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. My mom was asking him why he'd been so distant lately, why he wasn't as affectionate or attentive as he used to be. And Winston, he just stood there. He didn't even try to deny it. He just kept saying, "I don't know," over and over again. And my mom looked so broken. I could hear it in her voice when she asked, "Is there someone else? Is that why you're pulling away?" And for a second, I thought he was going to say something. I thought he was going to tell her the truth. But he didn't. He just shook his head and said, "No, of course not." I went back to my room after that. I couldn't stand to listen anymore. I just sat on my bed, staring at the floor, feeling like my chest was going to cave in. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to run into the kitchen and tell her everything, to beg her to forgive me, to take it all off my shoulders. But I couldn't. I couldn't even move. Because no matter how much I hated myself for lying to her, I was terrified of what would happen if she found out. Terrified of what she'd think of me, of what she'd do to Winston, of how it would all end. And then, a couple of days later, it happened. The thing I'd been dreading. My mom found something. I don't even know how. Maybe she went through his phone, maybe she overheard something she wasn't supposed to, but she knew. I could see it in her face the moment she confronted me. She came into my room, shut the door behind her, and asked, "What's going on between you and Winston?" Just like that. No build-up. No hesitation. Just the question I'd been running from since the trip. I froze. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to lie, to say, "Nothing, Mom. Nothing's going on." But I couldn't. The way she looked at me, it was like she already knew. Like she was just waiting for me to admit it. And I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle the disappointment in her eyes, the anger, the hurt. So I just sat there, staring at her, unable to speak. And then Winston walked in. He must have heard us talking, because he came in and said, "What's going on?" My mom turned to him, her voice shaking, and said, "You tell me." And the way he looked at her, it was like all the color drained from his face. He didn't know what to say either. None of us did. We just stood there, trapped in this horrible silence, until my mom finally broke down and yelled, "Tell me the truth." But he didn't. He didn't say anything. And neither did I. We just stood there, watching her fall apart, because we were too scared to admit what we'd done. Too scared to face the consequences. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just carrying the weight of the secret anymore. I was carrying the weight of her pain. And I knew that no matter what happened next, things would never be the same again. Looking back on everything now, it feels like a bad dream. A dream I can't wake up from, no matter how hard I try. It's been months since it all happened, but it's still with me. The shame, the guilt, the confusion, it's like this shadow that follows me everywhere I go. Some days, it feels so heavy I can't breathe. Other days, I almost convince myself I'm okay. Almost. Winston and my mom, they're not the same anymore. Their marriage is hanging on by a thread, and I know I'm the reason why. My mom doesn't know everything, she never will, but I think she knows enough. She knows Winston wasn't who she thought he was. And even though she doesn't say it, I can feel it in the way she looks at me sometimes. Like she's trying to figure out if I'm hiding something. And I am. I always will be. I don't see Winston much anymore. He's still around, of course. He's still married to my mom. But I avoid him as much as I can. I don't talk to him, I don't look at him, I don't let myself be in the same room with him if I can help it. At first, he tried to reach out, tried to act like nothing had changed, but I think he's starting to get it now. I think he knows I'm done. It's not just him, though. I've been pulling away from everyone. My mom, my friends, even myself. I guess I thought if I could put some distance between me and everything that happened, it would make it easier. But it hasn't. If anything, it's made it harder. Because now, I'm alone with my thoughts. And the truth is, I don't know how to feel about any of it. I don't know how to forgive myself for what I let happen, or how to stop blaming myself for everything that came after. The thing is, it's not black and white. It's not just one thing or the other. What happened between me and Winston, it wasn't just wrong. It was confusing. It was messy. And even now, I don't know how to define it. Was I manipulated? Maybe. Did I let it happen? Yeah, I did. Do I hate him? Sometimes. Do I hate myself? All the time. But even with everything he did, and everything he didn't do, there's still this part of me that doesn't know how to let go. And I hate that. I hate that he has this hold on me, even now. But I've realized something. I can't keep living like this. I can't keep drowning in this guilt and shame and letting it take over my life. I don't know if I'll ever fully move on from it, or if I'll ever understand why it happened the way it did. But I do know that I can't keep running from it. I need to face it. I need to figure out how to let it go. I've started talking to someone, a therapist. It's scary, opening up like that. Talking about things I've never even said out loud before. But I know it's the right thing to do. Because for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm starting to take back a little bit of control. I'm starting to understand that what happened wasn't just about me. It was about Winston. About his choices. His manipulation. And I need to stop carrying the weight of that on my own. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that boundaries matter. They matter more than I ever realized. And so does speaking up when something doesn't feel right. I didn't do that when I should have, and I'll always regret it. But I also know I can't change the past. All I can do is try to learn from it. To grow from it. To be better. I don't know what's going to happen to my mom and Winston. I don't know if their marriage will survive, or if it even should. But that's not my responsibility anymore. I can't fix it for them, and I can't keep letting it eat away at me. I have to let go. I have to move forward. And maybe one day, I'll be able to look back on all of this and not feel so broken. Maybe I'll be able to forgive myself, even if I never fully understand why it happened. But for now, all I can do is take it one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I think I'm ready to do that. Either way, I want to hear what you think. Tell me, what would you do if your world fell apart like mine did? How would you move forward? Let me know in the comments. And if this story made you feel something, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.